Welcome to a new episode of The Journey, and it's a perfectly named podcast today because my guest has just returned from an extraordinary, successful world record attempt, a journey of more than 2,600 kilometres on a stand-up paddleboard, alone down the full length of the Murray River and circumnavigating some of our Great Lakes too. He has an incredible story. And he joins me. Peter Charlesworth, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Really well, thank you.
Good.
Now, all right, I'm going to ask you the standard first question,
and
then we'll twist things slightly with today's journey. So what's your heritage to our region?
Okay.
Are you born and bred here?
No, I was born in Williamstown in Melbourne, maritime town. Grew up around the ocean. I was a lifesaver and lifeguard down there and went to primary school in Williamstown, went to school on the eastern side of Melbourne, and moved up here about 24 years ago. Came up here with family, yeah.
So obviously don't regret it, 24 years.
No, love it here, absolutely. I guess the bit that the itch that I was scratching with the trip side of things was being landlocked, and I've lived my life on the ocean pretty much, like all of my formative years. Went sort of between Williamstown and the Great Ocean Road, and coming up here and sort of being isolated away from the water. Kind of, it was always a bit of something I needed to get back to. I always do find a way to. All right, we're going to get back to what brought you here in the first place and why you've stayed so long. But I want to actually start at the end. And that is this extraordinary journey that you've just finished. So it started in early March, went for, around 3 months, alone on a stand-up paddleboard, more than 2,600 kilometres. Can you possibly put into words what that experience has been like? I can. The experience was incredible. It was everything I sort of hoped it would be and more. And I did have a couple of close calls, and I've been asked fairly frequently, did you ever want to just pull the pin and come home? And there was only 2 occasions where I did, and they were in sort of positions where I overstretched myself and I made decisions that I hadn't fully thought through, and I took a bit of what I thought was a gamble or a calculated risk.
So give me an example.
Yeah, well, probably the clearest one would be Lake Albert. Well, I paddled into the top of Lake Albert with a strong, it was sort of a northeasterly wind, and I was on the wind shadow side of the lake, but those lakes are huge. Lake Alexandrina is enormous. It's nearly 40 kilometres long, and Lake Albert is just under 20. And on Lake Albert, on the wind shadow side, there was barely any wind chop. And I paddled across the high side of the lake and turned in thinking it would be safe to just get a tailwind. And by the time I got to the middle of the lake, it was waist-high white caps. The wind really took off on me and my whole body was cramping up, and I got to a really dark place. And if I had stayed in those circumstances for another hour or two, I would have had a real problem. And I kind of limped off the side of the lake and exhausted. And got to a place I didn't think I would, and it just came off making that decision. So from there on, I was being pretty measured about it. There were other smaller moments that got me close to that point, but things like leg pain and your feet swelling up in the heat and nerve pain, there were points where I couldn't feel my feet because you're standing for 11, 12, 13 hours a day on a sort of 35, 36 degree day, and your feet just swell. But I just started to learn to read my body, and because I was pitching way past the point of what was happening on face value in that moment, I had a much higher goal. It just became a matter of accommodating it and figuring out what strategy can I put in place to handle this, to get through it. And I didn't ever think, this is just going to end the trip, or just use it as an excuse to give up.
I mean, obviously you knew that it was going to be difficult. Nobody enters into something like that thinking it's going to be a walk in the park. But was it harder than you thought it would be?
In places, yeah, absolutely. But again, early on, without the benefit of the experience, I was I had these milestones in my head, like I was making myself do 10 kilometres before I'd even consider having a rest. And then I'd rest for 5 minutes and do another 10K. And my legs and my feet, my back would blow up and I'd really suffer. And I thought, you know what, maybe just listen to my body. When I start getting pins and needles, take a 5-minute break, sit down, elevate my feet, put my feet in the cold water, and try and work around it a little bit. And at the end of the day, I was doing very similar Ks. I just had to vary my approach and my mentality and put some things in place to set myself up to get through it more comfortably.
And you did get to stop and stay in towns and things like that. So part of the rules meant that you didn't have to do it every day continuously. You could take a bit of time out and meet some people and relax. And that must have been wonderful.
Incredible. Incredible. There was a thread, not a thread of tension, but a thread of staying disciplined and staying committed to the timeline through the whole thing. And when I was laid up, there was 4 periods on those big lakes at the end where I had 4-day blocks where the wind would just 70 plus Ks an hour and you'd be life-threatening to go. I would be anxious. So I'd be burning energy and be anxious and stressed about not getting in that day's paddling. And because it's not an infinite thing, I couldn't be out there. As it was, the plan was 70 to 80 days. And I did have 80 days of paddling, but the trip total was 99. Including those days where I was laid up and I got home on the 100th day. Yeah, so, I just had to learn to relax. But the people made the trip, just amazing people and fantastic conversations around healthcare and heart health, and which is where I was coming from.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's ended this section beautifully because, all right, we're going to start joining the dots now between that and what made you decide to do that, and let's go back to your childhood in Melbourne. And points in between include a massive health scare and a book as well. But let's get to that in a tick. So let's go back. Melbourne, you were born and bred. You decided to come up here. What brought you to Albury-Wodonga? So
family and work, change of lifestyle, all of those things, and was in Tulla Street in North Albury to start with, and with Scarlett, and
so Scarlett, your
eldest daughter.
Yep. So you met your partner in
Melbourne. Yeah. Well, actually at university down in Melbourne, and
what's her name, Pete?
Well, that is that part of a past life. So I've had some changes family wise. So at that point it was Meg, and then moved to Tulla Street in Albury. Circumstances changed, and we sort of recalibrated our lives, which was great. And so now I'm married to Bridie. So you may have heard of the Dog Education Centre over in Wodonga. Bridie's a powerhouse, dog training powerhouse in the region, and she is an incredible person. And she and I have Olivia. She's our youngest, and Scarlett. And we lead a diverse kind of life between all the different interests we have. Yeah. So
what brought you here? If you do love the ocean, what made you decide to settle here?
Just a change in life. Yeah, just a change in circumstances, and just to just take a fresh approach. And I've been like that throughout my whole working life. And I tend to be the sort of person that, and the paddle trip's a good example of that. I will get a sniff of what I think is a good idea and something that's going to add a bit of vibrancy and meaning to my life and the people around me, and I'll focus on it and run with it. And I've had quite a few different business interests over the years, and personal interests. The book you've mentioned is one great example of that, where I tend to be a bit ADHD, hyper-focused on things, and I find things that I can hyper-focus on, and I really sort of overachieve when I'm in the zone. I think, I think the paddle trip's a really good example of that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to get to the book in a sec. I'm intrigued about university. What did you study at?
Right.
At
so this is also getting into the diverse sort of range of experiences. I'm trained as a primary teacher. I've got a Bachelor of Education.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I did that at Deakin Uni in Warrnambool of all places. and spent most days on a surfboard down there. It was a fantastic place to live and study, and also trained as a landscape gardener. Yeah,
Right. So when you moved here, did you get into teaching or
no,
all landscape gardening?
No.
Neither.
No, neither. I was actually working for, they're now called, they used to be called Fjord International, and changed their name to Agboss, who in the end became the primary sponsor, the platinum sponsor of the paddle trip, which was fantastic to have their support. And they're a great local family, great employer locally. I think they've got 50 plus staff now, and they're really doing everything they can to consolidate their manufacturing here in Australia.
Yep.
And their whole sort of mantra is about supporting farmers and regional people and people just with their gardens and, home hardware and all that sort of stuff. So they're a great organisation and great family, and I've had a lot of personal contact with them as well. So that was really the first job I did when I moved here. And then out of the working with them, my photography really started to take off. And I've had probably, including the part-time bit at the start, almost 23, 24 years as a full-time professional photographer, commercial and event photography. And then the other interests have been sort of sideline interests.
What do you love about photography?
I've always, since I was 11, I borrowed my dad's camera when I was 11 and just fell in love with it. He had an old Praktica camera, which as cameras go isn't anything overly flash, but it was just that classic old film camera. Set up a darkroom at home, and I'm old enough to have started in film photography. I think it's a really good combination of that hyper focus that I have mentally and on projects, where I can vicariously go in with a client, let's say it's a Mars or a Rivoli, or, I have a lot of big corporate clients, or Joss, and I'll go in and be given a brief, but they'll give me a bit of creative license, and I'll build them an image library that they can draw down on for a period of time. So they'll give me a list of jobs they've finished and say, okay, we're going to give you access. When can you go out and do it? But they know I'll over deliver and build collateral they can draw on for the next quarter or the next 6 months, and with really fresh, vibrant content. And I absolutely love it. Yeah.
So you mainly focus on corporate clients rather than doing weddings and...
Well, weddings has sort of tailed off. I've got, I think, somewhere between 400 and 500 weddings I've shot over the years. That was a big core part of what I was doing. And I do still get quite a few, and they're really organic now. They just kind of come off. Typically, families I've shot within their families. I'll go. All the kids eventually will come to me and say, "Oh, you shot my sister's wedding, and we'd love to have you. We thought we really enjoyed you being around and love the photos." And it tends to be the way it works. I don't push overly hard because I've always had the attitude with that sort of work that I'd treat it like it's my first and last job, and stay as passionate as I could for the client and approach it from their point of view, not from mine. And that's kept that fresh the whole way through. But I guess over time, it's kind of, I'm moving more towards the corporate side. Yeah, corporate and corporate events. Yeah.
Tell me, has the increase in availability, obviously, of smartphones and pretty good cameras now on phones.
Yep.
What has that done to professionals? Has it actually helped? I mean, do people have a greater appreciation now of photography, or has it been detrimental because people think they can take their own shots?
I think, like in a lot of creative spaces, it literally boils down to move it or lose it. If you're looking at it from a professional point of view, like working professionally in that field, whether it's graphic design, producing content for social media. And there are some great organisations locally do brilliant work here who companies outsource that work to because they do such a good job, and consistency is king. If you can get into those spaces, you're producing content consistently. Now, if you're capable of doing that yourself, you could do that with an iPhone. You can shoot 5K video or 4K video, and if you know how to compose a shot and do decent sound and do your post-production work and bring it together in a professional package. There's plenty of people out there who do a great job of that themselves, but if it's not really a core part of what you do, then, but to be in the race, you have to be progressive and you have to be moving with the times and giving your clients what they're asking for.
Yeah. No, I understand. All right. Now, I want to go somewhat chronological here.
Yep.
Because I believe the book happened just before the massive health issue, which we'll get to with your heart. So,
yep.
So the book, what was it about, and why did you decide to write it?
The book, I'd actually started writing when I moved to Albury. I started writing it in a different form, and I didn't know at the time what it was going to be. And I put it down for a few years, and then I just had this draw to it, and it sort of started coming out as a personal development book, and I thought I'd run with that. And it's almost written in I'm revisiting all of the things that I've learned and I've been challenged with in my life, and not saying do what I do because I'm a guru. It's sort of written to myself about things that I could have made better decisions with earlier on, the lessons I've learned in my life. And it's the philosophy of it is, again, wrapped up in the paddle trip in terms of goal setting and breaking it down into consistent, actionable pieces, whatever it is that you're doing. And the book is called Rich, Happy, Strong, Free, and it's written around building capacity in those areas: wealth, happiness, your physical fitness and mental fitness and health, and the amount of freedom you have in your life, but not building any one of those at the expense of the others. So, not being a gym junkie driving around in a beaten up old car and nothing in your retirement fund, but actually approaching things from a balance point of view so that if you do get sick, you can cover yourself. If we do have an economic downturn like we are now, that you've financially got your bases covered as best you can. So it's really, and interestingly, it's found a kind of a weird home in prisons in the US. It's actually something I've had a few contacts from people who've been handed the book while they've been incarcerated overseas, and because it's written quite directly and it's sort of about cutting out the things that you shouldn't really be doing that are destructive.
So is this? So you finished the book? Would I be right in saying about 6 years ago? 6 years?
No. I literally, it was June 2020, right? This was just under 3 years ago. I had the first book signing at Dimmicks in Albury. Andrew and Heather over there, fantastic local business people.
They are, yes.
Yeah. They invited me in. I did my first book signing, and then at the end of that week, I started getting chest pain. And while I was mowing the lawns, and it was chest pain that had been sort of progressively getting worse with different things that I was doing. But I remember searing chest pain, short of breath, pain down the left arm, mowing the lawns.
Were you, sorry to interject, but were you fit and healthy?
Mate,
have you been fit and healthy through the decades?
And another reason for the trip, I was always athletic, always. And I've consistently, and it's not a brag, but because I look after myself, most people say, you're the age you say you are.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 50 now.
Yeah.
And I've just broken an ultra distance world record at 50. But I always did look after myself. But the issue was, and this was the foundational reason for the trip, is I had no idea, because the damage was inside, it was internal, and there's only some specific tests that you can do that will quantify that level of damage from a cardiac health point of view. And I thought, well, no one ever sat me down and said, heredity, family tree needs to be considered. And, we do need to run these types of tests to get a gauge on where your cardiac health is.
Do you mind us going back to
Don't mind.
the moment where it all? So you were saying you were mowing the lawns. You'd been feeling.
Yep.
What was the sensation?
Just pressure, pressure on your chest, and it's if you've done a big cardio set or you've gone for a run, or you do a hill run up Monument or whatever, and you just stopped that ascent and you're really drawing breath hard. You feel that pressure to get oxygen in. It's actually that pressure, but it's coming from your heart muscle. When you got blockages on your arteries on your heart's literally starving of oxygen. It's starved of oxygen and it's starting to break down. And it's your body's way of saying, you better stop, moving around because there's a supply issue here and we've got some damage going on.
Yeah, but you didn't realise that.
No idea.
And again, because, we've been told for years and years, obviously, that if you have certain lifestyle factors or you're obese or whatever, you can have serious issues. But with someone who's fit and healthy, it wouldn't be the first thing that would pop into your head.
No, absolutely not. And then you overlay because effectively the pathway for me was I had the angina, the chest pain, short of breath. I went in to have a stress test done at a private suite in Swift Street, and where they put you on a treadmill with the dots on your chest, and they do an ECG and take your blood pressure while you're putting your heart under load. So with a bit of mild exercise. And 30 seconds in, my blood pressure was 210/100.
Whoa.
And the doctor said to me, get off the treadmill, you're going to die. So that was very quick. They did through my sternum, did an ultrasound scan and said, you need to get yourself to the base hospital and admit yourself. We're going to send through a letter, an urgent letter. Now, this is where... And I've been one of these people with a bee in my bonnet about healthcare here and the state of affairs with the base hospital. My experience of it, and I know it's just my experience, but this is what I went through, is I was admitted with all of those symptoms. I admitted myself on a Friday. So I had the stress test on a Thursday, went in on a Friday, and I sat there for 3 days with no treatment and no testing. Now, my brother, who's a very senior doctor at Peninsula Private Hospital, he used to be the director of intensive care for the whole eastern half of Melbourne. So a very senior intensive care physician. He was ringing me every day and saying, what's happened with this angiogram? Why have they not done an angiogram yet? Which is where they basically put a marker dye in your arteries and take a 3D image of your arteries to see if there's narrowings in your arteries due to a build-up, atherosclerosis. No angiogram, no nothing. So I sat there for the 3 days, and my brother... Now, I was advocating for myself too. I was asking for treatment and asking to be moved, and they had 6 transfers that they'd booked in successively that they kept cancelling because COVID was taking off and they wouldn't take patients anywhere. So, and the poor head nurse who was in my ward, in the end, I said to her, you can't keep coming in here and saying... I've got a transfer booked and then coming and cancelling it because I'm getting anxious. Unless you got the trolley to wheel me out of here, just please keep it to yourself. She cried. That's like, I've been up all night trying to book this in for you to get this transfer done. But to cut along longish story short, my brother rang the then CEO of the hospital and said, I will put an injunction on the hospital through my barrister and fly him to Melbourne myself and sue you for costs. And if you kill him through your continued professional negligence, I will absolutely clean out the hospital. We'll sue you and I'll have your job. I was on a plane that afternoon. Now, I got flown to Melbourne. My mobile phone went off, and it was the admin assistants from the cath lab at the Albury Base Hospital. They hadn't even opened the email. She opened the email. I was strapped to the trolley in the ambulance and my mobile went off. And she said, can I interest you in an angiogram? And I said, you're kidding me. And she said, well, I'm sorry, but we're only open 16 hours a week in here. We can only afford to open the cath lab on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Now, it's no slight on anyone that's working at Albury-Wodonga Health, right? I'm on the ethics committee at the hospital, Albury-Wodonga Health. I've done that to try and help. I did the paddle trip to try and help. I'm bringing it up as a conversation to try and help. I'd like that admin assistant in the cath lab to have a full-time job. It's not her fault. It's not, the doctors that are in there and, the senior doctor who does all of the angiograms and stents and things in there, Dr. Sims, is a fantastic doctor. They just need more resources. They need better resources and a better depth in their payroll so they can keep people on and give them full-time work and save lives. We've got people, and the problem with cardiac, and I'm getting a bit of a bee in my bonnet here, and I'll just get this last bit out. The problem that I saw in cardiac that drove me to engage in this trip, a big part of the reason, and having this conversation around healthcare, was the glowing gap between our mentality around cardiac health and the way we look at cancer. And cancer rightfully it's on the desk, it's on the hit list. We test early, we test often, we test consistently, and the earlier the better. And that's the mantra. Now, I went to a cardiologist and raised the idea, the notion of early testing for cardiac health, and the response, and it was a conditioned response, and it was conditioned by that lack of resources I was just talking about. He turned around to me and said, no, you can't encourage people to do that because we need to save our testing resources for people that are critically unwell. And I thought to myself, that is just nuts. If I had a child who had cancer, the early stages of cancer, imagine the uproar. If anyone had a child that had the early stage, or parent or whatever, partner, the early stages of cancer happening, and a doctor turned around and said, no, little Johnny, we're not going to test Johnny because he's not sick enough yet. Come on. And that's normalised with cardiac. So my thought was, we need to push back. We need to make it a squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
You know, with all forms of cancer, and we need to do the advocacy and push harder for better resources, more money, and it shouldn't be our biggest killer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was obviously a big part of the trip and the journey. So this was in 2020.
Yep.
You know, it's only a few years later that you've done this extraordinary trip. So
yeah.
How quickly did you, well, first off, an operation, I would imagine?
Triple bypass. Yep.
How long did it then take for you to mentally and physically to even consider going on a trip like this?
Well, the triple bypass, for those that don't know, and there will be a few that don't know, I had no idea what it meant. So in a nutshell, your heart muscle has 5 arteries on the outside of it, and you have occlusions or blockages or narrowings. And basically what a bypass is if you imagine your garden hose from your tap to your sprinkler and it's on, and I walk up with a clamp and I clamp it in the middle, the sprinkler will turn off, but there'll still be water pressure on the tap side of the blockage. All they're doing is putting a T-joiner on that part of the hose with flow and bypassing the blockage and reconnecting it on the other side to restore flow. And that's what they do on the arteries on your heart, from your aorta around the blockage and then onto your heart. So to do that, they've got to saw your sternum in half and crack you open like an egg. For me, it meant taking the arteries out of my forearms, my radial arteries, and one artery from underneath my rib cage, which is fine. The surgeons come in and say, can we have that? Can we have that? And well, you know, it's going to keep me alive. Go your hardest. Yeah.
But I would imagine you're not feeling terrible, are you? Because, I mean, I know that you were saying that you started to get shortness of breath. Was that continuous or?
Yeah. At that point, I was basically kept alive with a spray. It's a spray that goes under your tongue that makes you vasodilate without going into the actual medication. But I went in, had that done, and then you basically go through a couple of days. It was 7-hour surgery, a couple of days in a coma in ICU, woke up with, you have sternal wires, and it's not unique to me. There's plenty of people that have bypass surgery, but you wake up and your sternum's loose and the only thing holding it together is like fencing wire twitch, and you have to learn to walk again. So you're up and walking within 4 or 5 days. They want you to do that. That's the first step in the recovery. And then it was just a gradual recovery over 6 months, 3 to 6 months from the trauma of the surgery physically, because everything atrophies and you can't move around properly. And that affects everyone differently. But I just basically took my experience and I thought, well, I had all this damage that had happened without me knowing, I'm actually going to have a hit list of all the things I need to consider: rest, exercise, stress, nutrition, right? And then drugs and alcohol. Not that I did any drugs other than alcohol, but alcohol's a drug, so you put that in that category. And then supplements and medication. So there's roughly 6 things, and I just basically did a list of things that I include and the things that I excluded based on how I personally responded to it. And the first thing was nutrition, rest, and then exercise, which I gradually ramped up. So I literally started on the exercise bike when I could move and walk. I walked into the garage at home and I did 1 kilometre. And then the next day I walked in and I did 2. And it's literally, I went on with that, and I didn't stop till I finished the paddle trip.
And when did you start to feel like you were back as a similar, kind of physical condition?
12 months.
To 12 months.
12 months.
And did you enjoy the process because it was such a challenge?
100%. Everything about it.
I can imagine someone like you would. I can imagine other people may not, but I can imagine that you would almost like a Rocky movie. Your back's to the wall. You
got no choice.
You're fighting.
Yeah. And it's not a something that I ever wanted to make. Even this, like making a big song and dance about it. I have mad imposter syndrome. Like I would be going down the river and people go, "Oh, what are you doing? That's bonkers! Like you're off your head." Like. And I'd feel weird talking about it on a level, but it was really a combination. I didn't want to lose the opportunity to have the conversation about health.
Yeah.
And still challenge myself. That's a big part of it. I wanted an adventure. I wanted to be challenged and do something that no one's ever done before. And if it wasn't for the heart surgery and going through that adversity, I wouldn't have done the trip. It was the trigger. I just went on with it. And it's sort of, and I say yes to more, going up in helicopters to do photo shoots and things like that. I don't hesitate now.
Are you living a better life? I mean, one of the questions that we often ask in the journey is a sliding doors moment. And the idea really is it's a sliding door moment really of your own choosing, I guess, because of the decisions that you made. This wasn't, but are you living a better life?
I see it. Yeah, and in that question, I would consider this a sliding door moment. It literally presented me. I went through the experience and stepped out through the door, being faced with an increased awareness, a personal awareness of the importance of consistency in making those decisions. And I'm getting approached now by schools and health organisations, and because they're seeing the message behind why, and they're looking with their cohort or their student group or whatever it is to hopefully get that message across and flick some switches in people's thinking about, what, maybe I can refine the way I eat or when I eat. Things like intermittent fasting. That's all the sort of preparatory stuff that I was doing nutritionally. I experimented with all of that and found a balance that worked for me. And it was either in or it was out based on how I responded to it. And when you take that approach, but the key to it is the goal. So, and the key to getting through the adversity and being stuck in the middle of the lake and feeling like I was going to die. And I just wanted to push the button on the EPIRB and have someone come pick me up. Mate, I was in tears out there. I couldn't stand. I was just about throwing myself off the board, and it was just, I had to take a deep breath and slow down and say, this is more decisions. This is just another fork in the journey. Like it's another fork in the road. And I can make that decision. I can just pull it back a little bit and I can manage the situation. And I've calculated everything else. I made a bad decision to come in at the top of the lake here. Learn from it. Yeah.
Was the goal? Obviously, the goal initially was just to get yourself healthy. But when did the goal start to switch to this crazy idea of paddling 2,600 plus kilometres? When did that become something that you'd really focused on?
Well, it was 18 months of planning before I left.
So you had the operation. Your immediate few months was obviously just getting fit and healthy again, and it mustn't have been long after that that you thought, you know what, I'm actually going to go for something extraordinary.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not a hard date that it happened. Interestingly, it's like the book. When I wrote the book, I'd already sort of had the wheels in motion, and a lot of the equipment that I took with me, I'd already started building the kit that I needed to make a trip like this happen, even though I hadn't defined what this trip was. So I'd probably had 25-30% of the equipment already in the cupboard on the shelf, the adventure cupboard, if you know what I mean. And it sort of it kind of forced my hand into polarizing it into a thing in going through this process and going, okay, well, and the biggest reason that I got Guinness World Records involved was it's not the biggest reason. It was in almost a side note. I was just looking online and looking at what people had done and considering options to have an adventure and to do something unique. And I thought, I'll just run this through Guinness and I'll see what if someone's done this, because you see them on there. You know, you might have seen Bonnie Hancock. She's an Australian surf lifesaver. She, just before I went on my trip, and I've had a few people say, what you've done blows me away. Like, I can't believe it, which I guess is fair enough after a triple bypass. But she did 14,000 Ks around Australia, circumnavigated the whole country on a surf ski in the ocean, like saltwater crocs and sharks and whales and, you know, boat drivers who were saying to her while she was on the water, I can't take the boat out today. It's too dangerous, or we need to reconsider what we're doing. And, you know, she's trying to have to negotiate sort of keeping things moving. And so, yeah, I looked and it was within reach. And I thought, well, maybe if I add the Guinness World Record aspect in, it'll give it a little bit more gravity, which I think, because it got a little bit of traction with Sunrise, Weekend Sunrise, they did a piece on it. And I think having it as a Guinness World Record added to the messaging and the appeal for the general public to kind of buy in.
Yeah, and of course it was you tied it in directly to heart health as well. So I mean, it ticked all the boxes.
Yeah,
and took you, as we said, 3 months. So now you've finished that.
Yep.
What's the next challenge then, Peter? Are you going to add to your book, because your book can have multiple extra chapters in it now? What's the focus?
I actually have without giving too much away, I've got a list of about because we have a range of interests as it is, but I'm looking at consolidating. I've got roughly 10 things that I work on, and I'm going to be consolidating those potentially to something new that I've never done before, which is more along the lines of the way I've lived my life. You know, I look for unique opportunities and things. I'm not the sort of person that can just lock into a cubicle or a job and do 30 years of it. You know, my brother's got that gene, but I got this kind of weird blend of creative and intense focus and
back to photography.
No,
as
I think
base,
there'll
though?
always be those regular clients that I have. They can just call me or send me a job list and I'll go do it. But that's only going to be a percentage of the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I've got a few things up my sleeve. I don't want to give too much away. But yeah, I'm looking at doing something new and unique that hasn't been done before, and actually learning from my own experience in bringing this paddle trip together. And because I had a good mate bail me up yesterday at the supermarket, and he said, mate, I didn't think you had it in you. He said, when you put it up online, I just didn't think you'd be prepared enough, or you had it in you. And I'm sorry I doubted you. You've shut me up. You know, like, I'm amazed. Congratulations. He stuck his hand out and shook my hand. So that level of achievement, I know I can achieve big things. And this one particular area in those 10, I'm going to double down on it.
All right, watch this space.
Yeah.
Classic. I want to end in a slightly different way. I want you to just look behind you at the TV.
Yeah.
And we've got a picture of, I assume that's Lake Hume.
Yeah. Yeah.
What goes through your mind when you see it's a picture of the trees that coming out of the water and the beautiful, the hills in the background?
Yeah.
What's your thought when you see something like that now?
I have an altered sense of scale. So in practical terms, I see that as that's just a minute fraction of what's out there. It's beautiful. And for people, and even in my own life, when I've seen things like that, I've gone, it makes me feel free. That looks amazing. It's a huge kind of vista. It's actually not. It is in a sense, but it's just a fraction of what's out there. And it's beautiful, but there's a whole lot more.
Yeah.
There's so much more.
Yeah. And
so much more in terms of what you can enjoy and what you can endure and what's on the other side of enduring the hard. In the context of the paddle trip, that takes me straight to the paddle trip. I had plenty of days like that. I'd have days where I just didn't want to be on the board. Like, you'd have pain all day and adverse weather conditions, and some piece of music had come on in your headphones, and you'd look up and the sun would break through the clouds and you'd get goosebumps up the back of your neck and tear up. And no one else would see that. I had one glorious moment coming through a national park I looked up what it was. It was a little kingfisher, electric metallic blue, called an azure kingfisher with a vibrant orange chest. Never seen one before, and it was flicked up like a bat and speared a fish and landed back on the branch right next to me. And I didn't get it on camera. No one else saw it but me, but I teared up, and it was just a priceless moment that it put everything into context. How and also the sense of how the cameraman at Channel 7 sent me a photograph, which is on my website, the photography website. I've got a paddle page on there for the world record, which is a shot of me in the foreground with the Murray Mouth behind me and the ocean. And it was my wife's grandmother said, it just goes to show in the scheme of it how insignificant we are. It's in her head. That's kind of, so that kind of gets me to that sort of sense of scale. Yeah.
Extraordinary. Well, what a journey, and what a journey it's been today as well. And it still feels like just a snapshot, but it was wonderful. Adventurous, author, photographer, and in another life, maybe a teacher as well at primary school. Pete Charlesworth, thank you so much for sharing your journey. Pleasure. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Appreciate it.